I was at a family gathering a few weeks ago, and my uncle started talking. He wasn't angry, not at first. He spoke with this calm, almost sad certainty about how the country was being quietly taken over. Not by an army, but by an ideology.
Yeah.
He had a whole list of people he was convinced were secret communists or socialists, certain professors, a few journalists, some actors from Hollywood. To him, their ideas weren't just different, they were like a deliberate attack.
Right. The enemy within.
Exactly. And what was fascinating was his evidence. He didn't point to economic policies or legislative text. No.
Yeah.
Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed me a few short viral video clips of a campus protest and a screenshot of a controversial headline.
Ah, the modern evidence snippets.
Yeah. You see? He said, as if this was the final irrefutable proof. They're not even hiding it anymore. The whole conversation felt so incredibly modern, you know. A product of our specific polarized algorithm-driven moment. But here's the thing. If you took that same speech with that same tone of quiet paranoia and that same vague accusation-based evidence, and you broadcast it not from a smartphone, but from a boxy black and white television in 1953...
Nobody would have batted an eye.
Not at all. In fact, it would have been mainstream. You'd be listening to the exact same fear, just aimed at a different list of names. And it reveals a terrifying truth. The political playbook that nearly broke America 70 years ago isn't just history. It's being rerun right now in high definition.
That's a chilling thought.
It really is. And that terrifying realization that the discourse we hear daily is simply a modern script based on a historical template, that's what we're digging into today in this deep dive. We're looking at the paranoia of the McCarthy era and drawing that direct, chilling line to today's polarized rhetoric.
Right. And our mission today is precisely to move past just recounting the history and actually analyze the foundational mechanisms. We're looking for the historical and psychological playbook of political paranoia and fear-mongering.
So not just what McCarthy did, but why it worked.
Exactly. Why those tactics are so effective, both back then and, crucially, right now. Especially how they show up in our modern era of digital information.
Yeah.
Well, information warfare, really. And what our research calls collective gaslighting.
Okay, collective gaslighting. We'll definitely need to unpack that later. But first, let's get into this constant feature you mentioned, this American political tendency. The idea that McCarthyism wasn't some weird blip in history.
Not at all. It was more like a revelation, as one source puts it, to the rhetoric that was increasing in American politics over decades. The core idea, the thesis here, is that during times of crisis, or perceived crisis, there's this fundamental constancy in U.S. domestic policy.
And that constancy is?
It's the willingness to sacrifice fundamental personal liberties for the sake of alleged national security. It's a trade-off America seems to make again and again.
And often loses out on.
You could argue that. John Adams, way back, stated it plainly. Fear is the foundation of every government and American authorities. When they perceive a threat, doesn't matter if it's foreign or domestic, they've repeatedly shown the highest costs they're willing to pay.
Costs in terms of constitutional rights, due process.
Exactly. All in the name of preserving a presumed security. McCarthy just firming. Well, he perfected the televised exploitation of that vulnerability.
It's still astounding to me that the mechanics haven't really changed. Fear demanding a scapegoat.
It goes way back. You mentioned tracing this pattern.
We have to. All the way back to the beginning, really. Think about the Salem Witch Trials, 1692.
Right, Salem. The classic example.
It's almost the origin story of American paranoia. What makes Salem such a perfect, if horrifying, analogy for McCarthyism is the reliance on spectral evidence.
Spectral evidence. So stuff you can't actually see or prove.
Precisely. Evidence based on dreams, visions, spiritual afflictions. It's only apparent to the accuser. The enemy was entirely internal, impossible to disprove, and therefore potentially everywhere. And the authorities encouraged people to point fingers.
They did, which led to this eccentric pattern of conviction. The scary psychological part is, if the enemy can't be proven physically, the only way you can demonstrate your loyalty is by accusing others. Feelingly, preemptively.
Which creates this feedback loop of hysteria.
A mass psychogenic disorder, exactly. Hysteria feeds itself. And innocent lives get destroyed before eventually, sometimes you see confessions and apologies try to roll back the tide, but the damage is done.
So that was the internal spiritual enemy. But then the playbook shifted, right, to more visible enemies.
It did. Once the colonists sort of finished turning on each other, the fear playbook pivoted. You see it in the massive anti-immigrant hysteria of the 19th century.
Ah, okay. The external cultural enemy arrives.
That's the next stage. Identify a new visible source of contamination. The 1840s, you had a huge influx of Irish immigrants. Many were Catholic.
And that caused a backlash.
Intense, systemic anti-Catholic sentiment, often weaponized politically, by groups like the Know Nothing Party. The Irish were viciously labeled white Negroes.
Wow.
Which just shows you how deeply racial and cultural segregationist ideas got baked in. Mottos like, "No Irish need apply." That was real. It culminated in brutal events like the 1844 Philadelphia Bible riots. Catholic churches, property burned.
What was the core fear driving that?
The fear was that these newcomers were fundamentally undermining American Protestant culture, that they weren't real Americans.
And this fear wasn't just aimed at Europeans, it got directed towards Asians too, didn't it? The Yellow Peril.
Absolutely. This pervasive fantasy that Asian expansion would just overwhelm the West, pollute American society, take jobs.
So it's economic anxiety mixed with racial fear.
A potent combination. And the documents show it led directly to the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. That was the first major U.S. law restricting immigration based purely on nationality.
But the peak of that specific hysteria, the most terrifying example, has to be the Japanese internment during World War II.
It really does. After Pearl Harbor, think about it. Approximately 117,000 people of Japanese descent, 2/3 of them were American citizens, forcibly relocated to camps.
Based on nothing but suspicion.
Purely ancestry and suspicion. Not a shred of evidence of widespread disloyalty. It provided this horrifying legal precedent. The government could strip citizens of their rights based on identity during a crisis. That's a key pillar McCarthy would later lean on heavily.
That willingness to just discard fundamental rights. That's the through line. And before we get right to the 1950s, there's another critical piece. The first Red Scare in 1919.
Yes, crucial. It essentially built the government infrastructure that McCarthy later inherited and weaponized.
What was the context for that first scare?
Explosive. Post-World War I, high unemployment, lots of union strikes, labor unrest, and then the big one. The 1917 Russian Bolshevik Revolution sent this ringing alarm through the establishment.
A perfect storm, really. Fear of economic instability meets fear of revolution.
Exactly. Anti-radical sentiment just surged.
And the government's response was immediate and aggressive. The Palmer raids.
Oh, yeah. Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, along with a young J. Edgar Hoover, basically weaponized the existing Espionage and Sedition Acts. They launched this full-scale crusade against anyone deemed a radical leftist.
What stands out about that period, 1919 to 1920?
The sheer speed and paranoia. Thousands arrested, often without warrants, often with zero concrete evidence. It really institutionalized the surveillance of political thought. The raids showed, as one source says, how frightful it was to be the wrong sort of person in America.
So just being foreign or having radical ideas?
It was enough. The government's rejection was so total that just having an alibi of alienation, just being different, was sufficient for authorities to charge. It wasn't just the arrests, it was Hoover building this apparatus, cataloging dissent.
And the tragic endpoint of that particular wave of paranoia was the Sacco and Vanzetti trial, right?
Yes. That's the moment the fear officially turned fatal for radicals. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, self-admitted Italian anarchists, convicted of armed robbery and murder in 1921.
But the evidence was shaky.
Very shaky. Contradictory evidence, they had solid alibis. But the trial, the public debate, it was all overwhelmingly influenced by their politics and their foreign identity. They were sentenced to death, executed in 1927.
What did that trial prove in terms of this playbook?
It proved irrefutably that in times of ideological panic, your political beliefs and where you came from could absolutely override due process in a court of law. It confirmed that the target might change witches, immigrants, radicals, but the mechanism of fear, that was constant.
Okay, so that sets the stage perfectly for the 1950s, the second Red Scare, McCarthy. This time, the stakes feel even higher.
They were. It shifted from economic anxiety, though that was still there, to a truly existential crisis. You had the Cold War tensions, obviously, the Soviet Union rejecting U.S. dominance, and then the real game changer. The Soviets tested their own atomic bomb in 1949.
Shattering that American illusion of nuclear monopoly.
Completely. So fear shifted. It wasn't just about policies anymore. It became about doubted thoughts. The anxiety was that communism wasn't just over there. It had somehow seeped into popular culture, into institutions, and worst of all, into the government itself.
And the government started acting on this suspicion even before McCarthy really hit the scene, right? Truman's loyalty board?
That's an essential piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
The loyalty board, set up in 1947, basically codified official suspicion within the government. It established the systemic framework.
How did it work?
It empowered agents to test employees' Americanism and patriotism. Think about that. Testing patriotism. It led to about 1,200 employees being dismissed simply for having doubtful allegiance.
Doubtful allegiance, not proven disloyalty.
Yeah, just doubt. And another 5,000 or so resigned under pressure. The message was crystal clear. Just being suspected was enough to ruin your career, your life. It legitimized the whole witch hunt framework right inside the bureaucracy.
And then this atmosphere gets supercharged by these high-profile spy cases. They gave the public paranoia real, tangible proof.
Exactly. They fueled the fire. There are 3 key cases we really need to look at. First, the Alger Hiss case.
The State Department official accused of spying.
Right. Alger Hiss, accused by an ex-communist spy, Whittaker Chambers, of passing classified documents to the Soviets. Hiss always maintained his innocence, but Chambers produced this dramatic evidence, the pumpkin papers, microfilm hidden in a pumpkin.
Made for media drama.
Totally. Hiss was ultimately convicted, but only of perjury, not espionage. But the political impact.
Yeah.
Immense. It seemed to validate the deepest fears about communist government infiltrations. It gave ammunition to those claiming the government was riddled with spies.
Okay, case number 2, the Eurasia spy case. This one seems different, broadening the definition of treason.
That's a crucial shift to the playbook, yes. The FBI found stolen confidential documents in the offices of Eurasia magazine back in 1946. This led to accusations against the so-called China hands.
Who were they?
Foreign service officers, journalists, people whose perceived sympathy for Chinese self-governance, for Mao's communists over Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists, was suddenly deemed grounds for loyalty investigations, for blacklisting.
So it wasn't necessarily spying, but having the wrong political sympathies.
Exactly. The argument wasn't even that they were active spies. It was that their ineptitude and sympathy towards communism led to the loss of China. Sympathy itself became a form of treason, a dangerous precedent.
And then the third case, the most severe, the Rosenbergs.
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, charged with spying, conspiring with the Soviets. Denounced by Ethel's own brother David Greenglass after the Klaus Fuchs atomic spy case broke.
This was about the atomic bomb secrets.
Yes, providing data related to the Manhattan Project, their execution in 1953. The sources call it a dreadful event. It really underscored the perceived severity of capital treason. There's still debate about Ethel's specific guilt, but the government's aggressive push for the death penalty hammered home the message. The threat is real, it's deadly serious, and extreme measures are justified. The system was primed.
Primed for its champion. Enter Senator Joseph McCarthy. And the sources suggest his motives weren't entirely pure.
Well, let's just say the picture painted is one of opportunism as much as patriotism. He'd had a fairly lackluster start to his career, failed as a judge. He needed something.
And he found it in anti-communism.
He found a ready-made weapon in that fever pitch. He was apparently quite skilled at, let's say, playing with the truth. And he used that skill to blame America's problems on these hidden internal conspirators. His big launch moment was that speech in Wheeling, West Virginia, February 1950.
Right, the famous speech with the list that kept changing numbers.
Exactly. Vague by design. He claimed to have a list, sometimes 57, sometimes 205, of known communists or sympathizers working in the State Department. But the crucial move, the real rhetorical trick,
Was what?
he asserted that the government's failure to root them out wasn't incompetence, it was complicity. He twisted inaction into proof of treason. That speech basically launched McCarthyism.
And how do the sources define McCarthyism itself?
As something incredibly destructive. The corruption of truth, the abandonment of our historical devotion to fair play, and centrally, the use of the big lie and the unfounded accusation against any citizen in the name of Americanism and security.
The big lie. And the consequences of that lie spread through official channels and unofficial ones, like the blacklists.
Those blacklists were the teeth of the paranoia.
Yeah.
Yes, federal, state, local governments created official lists. But the most culturally visible damage, perhaps, came via the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC.
HUAC in Hollywood.
That's the famous connection. HUAC compelled producers, writers, actors to testify. To answer that terrifying question, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
And refusing to answer meant
Contempt of Congress charges, jail time, career ruin. The Hollywood 10 famously refused on principle and paid the price.
But what's really chilling is how this persecution spread beyond government committees. Private groups got in on the act.
That's when you know it's a true witch hunt environment. It permeates society. The most notorious non-government example was a publication called Red Channels.
What was that?
It was basically a private blacklist, printed in 1950. It named 151 figures in entertainment, actors, writers, directors, suspected of having radical affiliations. These pamphlets were circulated to network heads, studio bosses, hiring managers.
So just being named in this private document could end your career.
Absolutely. Professional ruin. It shows how, once the fear is weaponized like that, the burden of proof just flips. It's not on the accuser anymore. It's on the accused to somehow prove their innocence against vague suspicion. Persecution gets entrenched everywhere, not just in Washington.
It's an overwhelming picture of paranoia, gutting civil liberties, destroying lives. Did anyone push back effectively?
Yes. And the key figure that emerges is from journalism. Edward R. Murrow.
The famous CBS News correspondent.
The very same. Known for his integrity, his unparalleled standards of truthful and thoughtful broadcast journalism. He'd earned immense public trust reporting from London during the Blitz and WWII. He understood the danger when political figures actively attack the very idea of truth. He represented that institutional pushback.
And his challenge to McCarthy didn't start with a direct attack, did it? It was more subtle at first.
He was strategic. He chose a specific case first, the case of Milo Radulovich in October 1953, to highlight the sheer injustice of guilt by association.
Radulovich, he was kicked out of the Air Force Reserve.
Yes. Not because of anything he did, but because his father and sister were suspected communist sympathizers. Murrow zeroed in on that. He used his show, See It? Now, to expose the danger, the destruction of civil rights, inherent in judging someone based on their family.
How did the public react?
The outcry was significant, enough that the Pentagon actually reversed its decision and reinstated Radulovich. It was a sign that reasoned argument, backed by journalistic integrity, could actually challenge McCarthy's machine. It found a crack in the armor.
So having tested the waters, Murrow decided to go further.
He did. He escalated. On March 9th, 1954, he dedicated an entire episode of See It Now to confronting McCarthy directly.
How did he do that?
It was brilliant, actually. He largely used McCarthy's own words and actions, footage, recordings from the public record. He let McCarthy condemn himself, essentially. Murrow framed it as McCarthyism being fundamentally the corruption of truth and the spread of fear. It was this powerful visual indictment by the nation's most trusted newsman. And he ended by explicitly inviting the nation to stand up for democracy.
How did McCarthy respond? Predictably, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely predictably. His reply came a month later, April 6th. And it was a masterclass in the very tactics Murrow was exposing.
He attacked the messenger.
Exactly. The next step in the playbook. McCarthy didn't engage with the substance. He claimed Murrow's defense of civil liberties wasn't journalism. It was an act of allegiance to communism. He argued Murrow was just protecting fellow conspirators.
So he basically proved Murrow's point. Disagree with McCarthy, and you're automatically disloyal.
Precisely. He equated dissent with treason.
But McCarthy's downfall wasn't just Murrow, right? The Army McCarthy hearings played a huge role. The televised spectacle.
A massive role. The sources really stress the impact of TV here. Those hearings went on for 36 days, 188 hours broadcast live. Think about that. It was the first time many Americans were seeing something like this, court proceedings, political combat, right in their living rooms. It became a political spectacle.
And that raw, unscripted nature worked against McCarthy?
Absolutely. It provided this unprecedented opportunity for the public to see his character unfiltered. His aggression, his bullying tactics. It was all laid bare day after day.
And wasn't there one specific moment, an emotional climax, that really shifted things?
Yes. The moment involving the Army's counsel, Joseph Welch. McCarthy launched this aggressive personal attack on one of Welch's young associates, Frederick G. Fisher, basically implying he was linked to communist groups.
And Welch's reaction?
Welch, visibly stunned and disgusted, delivered that legendary line. "Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last. Have you left no sense of decency?"
Wow, you could hear a pin drop, I imagine.
That moment, it was electric. The public watched this process of character assassination unfold live, and they recoiled. That exchange is often cited as contributing directly to McCarthy's own character assassination in the public eye. The tide turned.
And the official outcome?
The Senate finally moved. They voted to condemn McCarthy in December 1954. Not for lying, interestingly, but for conduct unbecoming a senator. It effectively stripped him of his power, his committee chairmanships. His reign of terror was over.
So McCarthy the man is defeated, but the playbook, the tactics he perfected, they didn't just vanish, did they?
Not at all. That's the really sobering part. The sources make it painfully clear. The playbook just went dormant, waiting waiting for a new crisis, a new enemy label to attach itself to.
And that new crisis arrived.
It did, 9/11. The attacks provided the perfect new catalyst. And almost immediately, terms like Islamists, terrorists, they became the new political scapegoats, fulfilling that same recurring need to fight an enemy within, an enemy seeking absolute domination.
And the mechanisms of control popped right back up like watch lists.
Instantly. The concept of the watch list, systemic blacklisting based on suspicion, was immediately revived, ready to go.
And just like the old espionage acts paved the way for the Palmer raids, the post-9/11 legislative response quickly started chipping away at civil liberties.
The speed was remarkable. Think about the Patriot Act, rushed through in 2001. It massively expanded the government's authority for surveillance, made it much easier to spy on private communications.
And the key part was Section 215.
Yes, Section 215 became notorious. It allowed the government to demand records, phone records, financial records, library records of anything deemed relevant to a terrorism investigation. Relevant. Think how broad that is.
It sounds eerily similar to the doubtful allegiance standard from the loyalty boards. Vague suspicion justifies massive intrusion.
Exactly. It's looking for spectral evidence, again, just in digital form, giving the government immense power based on loose definitions of suspicion.
Which all led eventually to the Snowden revelations, the scale of domestic surveillance.
Right. Edward Snowden exposed programs like PRISM, top secret stuff, giving the NSA direct access to servers of major tech companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, filtering civilian communications on a massive scale.
And Snowden's core message was,
his core revelation, as the sources put it, was chilling. Even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded. That feeling, that fear of omnipresent secret scrutiny, it effectively replaced the old anti-communist hysteria with this pervasive, stressful anti-terrorist paranoia.
And that paranoia fueled the modern blacklists, like the TIDE database.
TIDE, the Terrorist Identities Data Mart environment. That's the direct contemporary echo of the McCarthy-era lists. As of 2009, it reportedly held around 700,000 names.
700,000.
Huge. And just like the old list ruined careers in Hollywood, being on TIDE could ruin lives, restricted travel, lost jobs, and critically, it affected American citizens, many with absolutely no connection to terrorism. It's the same principle. Suspicion, lack of due process, devastating consequences.
The anecdotes of mistaken identity really bring it home, don't they? The sheer absurdity, the injustice.
They really do. The sources mention Sister Glenn Ann McPhee, an education secretary, mistakenly identified with an Afghani man on the list who just happened to have a similar name. She spent 9 months fighting to clear her name. Imagine the resources that takes.
Impossible for most people.
Exactly. Or Walter F. Murphy, Princeton law professor, decorated Korean War veteran, denied a boarding pass, luggage searched repeatedly. Why? Because he'd publicly criticized President Bush for, quote, violations of the Constitution.
So criticizing the government gets you treated like a potential terrorist.
That's the implication and the fear. It validates the argument that the U.S. was effectively, once again, crusading against freedom of thought, assembly, and expression. The playbook just swapped labels. Communists became terrorist. But the core mechanic equating dissent with disloyalty that remained exactly the same.
Okay, so the pattern repeats, the labels change, but you mentioned something earlier, a more sophisticated evolution of this playbook enabled by the digital age. Collective gaslighting.
Yes, this is where it gets perhaps even more insidious. This is the deliberate attack on reality itself.
Gaslighting. We usually think of that in personal relationships, but collective gaslighting.
It applies the same core principle to the public sphere. Philosophically, gaslighting is about undermining self-trust, forcing the victim to doubt their own judgment, their own perception of reality. The sources talk about undermining epistemic autonomy.
Epistemic autonomy. Meaning our ability to trust our own minds.
Precisely. You're right at your ability to trust your own judgment about what's real and what isn't. In a political context, collective gaslighting isn't just about spreading lies or misinformation. It's a strategy to systematically undercut the public's faith in its own capacity to tell truth from falsehood.
Why? What's the goal?
To erode that autonomy, to make people dependent on the manipulator for their sense of reality. It replicates that control dynamic of an individual gaslighter, but on a mass scale. If McCarthy destroyed reputations, you could argue modern demagogues tried to destroy shared reality itself.
That's profoundly disturbing. How does it work tactically? The sources break it down.
They identify 3 main categories of this kind of post-truth rhetoric. Think of them as attacks on that epistemic autonomy. The first is the introduction of counter-narratives, designed primarily for confusion.
So not necessarily trying to convince people of one specific lie.
Not always. The strategy is often just to muddy the waters, to put out so many alternate accounts, often contradictory, often far-fetched, that the public gets overwhelmed, distracted, confused. The goal isn't belief, it's paralysis.
Can you give an example?
The classic example cited is the Russian government's disinformation campaign around the downing of Flight MH17 over Ukraine.
Right, they threw out all sorts of theories.
All sorts. The plane was already full of dead bodies, Ukrainian jets shot it down, the missile wasn't Russian.
Yeah.
On and on. None of it needed to be remotely believable. The point was just to sow doubt, to create noise.
And the harm is?
It pollutes the epistemic environment, as the analysis puts it. It makes people doubt whether their own faculties, their own judgment, are even capable of getting to the truth anymore. If everything is polluted with nonsense, you start to distrust your own ability to discern.
Okay, category 1. Confusion through counter-narratives. What's the second?
The second is discrediting of critics. This is the modern equivalent of McCarthy attacking Murrow, or HUAC destroying witnesses' credibility. The goal here is epistemic isolation.
How does that work?
The strategy shifts. You don't just attack what the critic says, their argument. You attack who they are. You dismiss opponents not just as mistaken individuals, but as part of a corrupt, biased, untrustworthy institution.
Like calling the press fake news or the enemy of the people.
Exactly like that. It's a direct echo of McCarthy calling Murrow a communist agent. Or you see it when political groups call for reporting leftist teachers, painting entire institutions, academia, the media, science as instruments of indoctrination. Some sources even refer to this as attacking the four corners of deceit.
And the effect of discrediting all these traditional authorities, journalists, scientists, academics.
The devastating effect is that people then doubt their own ability to figure out who is trustworthy. If you can't trust the news, can't trust experts, can't trust universities, who can you trust?
You become isolated.
Epistemically isolated. You're forced to become dependent on the manipulator, the one doing the discrediting for your information, for your sense of what's true. Your self-trust is damaged. Your autonomy is gone.
Okay, confusion, isolation. What's the third category?
The third, and maybe the most brazen, is the denial of plain fact. This aims directly at creating profound self-doubt.
This is just outright lying about something that definitely happened.
Often, yes. Blatantly denying something you said or did, even if there's video evidence, even if it's on the record, usually to save face or avoid blame.
How does that work as gaslighting?
It's often done subtly, maybe through careful phrasing, ambiguous dog whistles that supporters understand but allow for plausible deniability later. It forces the audience, especially critics, to carry the burden of interpretation. Did I misunderstand? Did I hear that wrong?
So it makes you question your own perception.
Exactly. Especially for people already confused by the counter-narratives or isolated by the discrediting of critics. When they hear the denial, maybe repeated by the manipulator's followers, they can genuinely start to question their own senses, their own sanity. Did I misinterpret that? Was it really that bad? It turns the victim's grasp on reality into something fluid, unreliable, under their control.
So when you put it all together, this recurring playbook, fear, scapegoating, isolation, now weaponized for the digital age through these gaslighting techniques, aimed at reality itself.
That's the chilling synthesis, yes. It's the ultimate enduring lesson here. The sources clearly show these mechanics of political manipulation are just recurrent throughout American history, from Salem relying on spectral evidence in the 17th century to the war on terror relying on digital suspicion in the 21st. That need for an unseen internal enemy, it just keeps coming back.
So McCarthyism wasn't a fluke, it was a template.
A devastatingly effective template. It showed exactly how demagoguery can ruin lives, cripple democratic institutions, silence dissent, just by swapping out the enemy label. Communist, terrorist, socialist, whatever comes next.
And the core conflict always seems to come back to those fundamental rights. Due process, freedom of speech, always under pressure when fear takes over.
Always. Which means the imperative for vigilance has to be collective. It's not just on journalists or judges, citizens, institutions. We all share this responsibility to actively uphold those fundamental rights against demagoguery, against political paranoia. We have to read this history, read these documents detailing these witch hunts.
Not as a reassurance, but as a warning.
Exactly. We have to recognize that undermining self-trust, whether it's an individual's trust in their own senses or a society's trust in its institutions and shared facts, is perhaps the primary tool of political control in our time.